Helen Littrel gives account of Raechel, a gray alien-human hybrid, retrieved by United States Air Force at a UFO crash. Raechel was adopted and assimilated into human society. Littrel describes her reddish blonde hair, spongy skin, and green wraparound eyes.
Anyway, I didn't think much about it at the time, but it stood there and waited for her to come back. And as she returned, I guess she tripped on a wrinkle in the rug or her own feet or something. Anyway, I could see she was going to go right over straight. She didn't bend at the waist or anything. She didn't try to catch herself either. So I was standing close enough to reach out and grab her, and I did. I grabbed her left arm and kind of stood her back up again. And as I did, the sleeve of her jumpsuit slid up. And by the way, she always wore a long-sleeve jumpsuit, plus a bandana tied around her head. And in those days, they tied it under the chin. They didn't tie it back in the back like they do now, but she had it tied under her chin, and she had huge wraparound sunglasses on. And she wore this whole outfit indoors and out all the time. So anyway, I reached out and I grabbed her arm, and as I did, her sleeve slid up like this. And I found myself grabbing onto skin that didn't feel quite real. I don't know if any of you out there, yes I do too, some of you are old enough to remember those dolls that we used to have. The skin was guaranteed to feel real. Well, it sort of did, but not really. And I remember my doll Beverly, she had skin like that. And anyhow, as I grabbed onto Raechel's arm and stood her back up, then with both hands, the skin didn't feel real. Not like other people's anyway. To begin with, it felt really cool, and it was a hot evening. It should have felt hot because it was in that part of California at that time of year. It's pretty warm. So anyway, I stood there holding onto her for a minute, and then I realized the skin felt different yet. It was sort of spongy, like mushrooms. And you know, mushrooms have sort of a cool, they just have a spongy feel to them, and that was how the skin felt. Well, if that would have been the end of it, that would have been great. I wouldn't have thought much about it. But just then, as a result of the jerk to bring her back up to standing, her glasses slid down on her nose, and I found myself looking face to face, eyeball to eyeball almost, into her eyes, and I had never, ever seen eyes like that in my whole life. They were huge, kind of rounded in the middle next to the nose, and they went clear around onto the outside of her temples, and about a third of the way, between a third and a half of the way out. And they were avocado green, the inside of an avocado. And they had vertical black slits. And for a few seconds, I was pretty frightened because I'd never seen anything like that. And I just stood there. I was just drawn into her eyes almost. I'd never felt like that before either. It was bad enough not to see anything like it. Never felt that way before, and as I kept looking into her eyes, I could see that she was much more frightened than I was. And at that moment, my emotions turned to more of compassion because of how frightened she was. And I don't know exactly what she was fearful of, except that she had been discovered, obviously, that I realized that she wasn't what she was supposed to be. And then I almost felt a sort of love for her. And the really weird thing was that as I stood there looking into her eyes, I felt that she was really beautiful. And yet I hadn't seen her hair yet, because she still had the kerchief tied around her head. But something in her eyes made me feel compassion for her.
Helen said something just now in relating that story. It was the same thing, and we did not rehearse this part. She said something. She said she felt like she was drawn into Raechel's eyes. We'll come back to that later. This is Helen's drawing of Raechel. Now, Helen isn't really an artist.
Sorry about that.
But I think you can get the idea of, she didn't look quite normal. Is there anything else you want to say about Raechel? I mean, you did eventually see her hair. It was...
Yes, I did. And it was a beautiful reddish blonde. It was kind of skimpy and wispy, and it sort of had a mind of its own, too. She tried to comb it and, have it look attractive, and she kept it short. So anyway, I didn't think much about